Another potentially big recruiting week for LSU, so this should be a fun episode for LSU fans to watch. And if you're not an LSU fan, give it a chance and maybe we'll win you over. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. This is Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. We have a few prospects to talk about, including LSU's most recent commitment, potentially LSU's next commitment, and maybe their next two. We talk about a couple of these guys. And Sam, I mean, we might as well start it like Fresh Prince and start with Philly. Big Philip Wright III, a guy who we got word of this weekend had backed off of a pledge to Michigan. He'd only been committed to Michigan for a few weeks now. That we covered the heck out of that going in and coming out of that July 13th announcement. And he backed off of that. And now there is a lot of optimism that he may end up a home state addition for the Tigers after all. What's kind of the latest on what you're hearing on Philly and what went into that decision to back off the Wolverines pledge?
Yeah, like you mentioned, he committed to Michigan over Georgia and really LSU in mid-July. You were covering it live. A lot of coverage leading into it after a busy June of official visits, and also making his way to Baton Rouge to camp for Coach Hankton and Coach Kelly, sitting down and meeting with them as well. But the official visit to Ann Arbor kind of blew Philly right out of the way. I think he saw an early path to the field, a lot of opportunities up there on and off the field in Ann Arbor, and really liked the idea of playing for not only Ron Bellamy, a Louisiana guy, but also Sharon Moore, the first-year coach at Michigan. So it was we figured LSU had their sights set on other receivers and maybe wasn't pushing so hard, but it didn't take long. They got him on campus for the Bayou Splash. Really started to kind of drive home with Philly how much they did want him to stay in state. Sometimes the timing is everything. And he was back up in Ann Arbor just, right after the Bayou Splash that weekend. But in light of all the NCAA allegations against the Michigan program, combined with LSU turning up the heat on one of the state's best players, a team that they had offered several months ago and have continued to evaluate and grow familiar with and nurture that relationship. I think they pressed the buttons at the right time, and now they're making a strong push to get him on board in this 2025 class.
You alluded to something that I was going to ask as kind of a follow-up. There's obviously, we talk so much about the relationship with Ron Bellamy. Obviously, there's been a great relationship with Cortez Hankton, Frank Wilson, and a lot of members of that staff at LSU. And the same day that Philly was committing to Michigan, his teammate Jace Thomas was committing to LSU. And so there's a lot of momentum. I've been watching their former teammate Kalaj Cobbins tear up his first days of camp as a freshman edge rusher. And so there's a lot of familiarity and push and whatnot from the LSU side. But at the same time, the word that he was backing off of the Michigan pledge leaked, our way and the way of a couple of Michigan reporters the same day that the news was coming out about some of the issues hitting Michigan, coming out because of allegations or whatnot the last couple of years. How much was that a factor in this? I guess the short answer is they're all factors to different degrees, but it sounds like from your perspective, that was something that kind of weighed on Philly a little bit too, as all this came together.
Yeah, I think, first, I think LSU deciding to kind of kick up the speed of their recruitment of Philly was one thing. You obviously see that he wasted no time getting back to campus. His first visit after committing to Michigan was back to LSU with the guys that you mentioned, his teammates, both in the 2025 class, and Jace and Jabari Mack also made it to campus that Friday. He went back to Michigan. I think, like when you make an early decision, how many times have I said it on this podcast? That opens the door up for things to change during the season. LSU didn't wait till the end of the season to turn up the heat. They just decided that the way the board was shuffling, this was a guy they wanted on board now, didn't want to wait. And I think that gave Philly a lot to consider on itself. Then you pair that with the NCAA allegations swarming around the program and not knowing what the penalties are going to be. That with the in-state team, dialing up their push, it I think it was just easy for him to explore his other options. You know that other teams are also opening the lines of communication with Philly again. No one pushing maybe harder than the Tigers, though.
And I don't know that we've reported a specific timeline for him, but I mean, whatever you may want to say, it sounds like fans need to keep a pretty tight eye on Philly. That it's not going to be a process that drags out a whole heck of a lot longer. This didn't become a situation where, okay, well, now I'm going to wait till December or anything. I think people need to be monitoring. But I don't know if you've got anything more to add to that in terms of his timeline other than soon, real
Let's
soon.
just, I would say, I guess I'm annoying. I don't know how much I tweet, but I would put myself on Twitter alerts and know that his season starts in September, and he won't be starting his senior season committed. I mean, uncommitted rather. He will
Uncommitted.
be committed going into his senior season.
Let's backtrack to the recent already established news in terms of joining LSU's 2026 class in Aiden Hall, the standout safety from Edna Carr, one of the top safeties in not only the New Orleans area, not only the state of Louisiana, but on a national scale. And yet another nice New Orleans addition to that LSU 2026 class early on. I thought he's a guy that we've seen as a lean toward LSU for a while, that if we were putting our money on it, he was probably ending up in purple and gold at the next level, just as he's been wearing the last few years over at Edna Carr. But he says he'd had enough of waiting and was ready to pull the trigger now before even beginning his junior year. How big of an addition to the early going of that Tigers class is an Aiden Hall?
Yeah, I think Aiden is kind of what you mentioned already. I think he's one of the best safeties in the country. He's definitely one of the best players in 2026, and credit to Blake Baker and Coach Kelly and Coach Wilson for look at the foundation that they've just created for this 2026 class before their junior years of Big Rich Anderson, maybe the best interior defensive tackle in the state for 2026. Jalen Chapman on the offensive side of the ball, Ja'Kai Anderson, one of the more electric weapons in the state for 2026, and then a nationally elite player in Aiden Hall, a guy that, spoiler alert, is going to be a big riser after a couple of weeks of rankings called. But Aiden Hall, on tape, in person, he shines. I know you and I have seen him a few times together. I've seen him probably 4 or 5 times between his sophomore and junior years already. Just someone who can play multiple positions at safety, whether back free. I think he can cover in the nickel, what we saw at LSU. What's been impressing me is how well he moves with his size. He's about 6'2", 200 plus pounds going into his junior year. He's not afraid to lower his shoulder and hit in the open field. He's a great tackler. I think he can be used in different ways depending on the scheme. But in coverage, I love how he patrols over the top as a free safety. And at LSU, playing up a little bit more press and then closing in from back deep. Really impressive stuff. And his physicality, I think, speaks for itself. Now I think LSU has a foundation with Aiden Hall, and they can go for their next big safety target, nationally elite, and also in the state of Louisiana.
We might as well just talk about Blaine Bradford at the same time. He just announced his top 5 a few days ago of LSU, Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, and Alabama. I was going to wait and kind of cycle back to Blaine at the end of all this because a top 5 isn't quite the same level of news as some of the commitments happening or decommitments happening and whatnot. But that's 2 guys that I've had right on a similar footing in terms of my Prep Red Zone Louisiana rankings, and they're different players in a lot of ways, but both will certainly, bring the physicality in their own right. And that's something that kind of stands out when you see him. What were your thoughts on seeing the Blaine top 5 come out? Doesn't get a whole lot better of a top 5 than those programs, and kind of where the Tigers stand with him as he moves forward in his now scaled down recruiting process.
Yeah, I think that anyone who's been paying attention to Blaine's recruitment knows that this has been his top 5. He's made visits to all of these schools over the past couple of months. He made it to LSU and Ohio State in June. He made it to Alabama and Notre Dame in July. And whoever I'm leaving out. Oh, I think Texas is probably the other team, which he's visited quite a few times. But he's been visiting all these schools right now to kind of get ahead of this, narrow it down ahead of his junior season. I imagine that he will have a commitment before his senior season. I imagine the official visits will loom pretty large for Blaine in the spring when he starts taking them. But yeah, I mean, you talk about the evaluation with Aiden. I mean, Blaine has, first of all, injuries derailed his sophomore season. He was one of the more the players that you and I know both privately talked about of someone that we're so excited to see. And um, fortunately, Catholic gets to play pretty late into the season,
Yeah,
which opened the door.
I was about to say
Yeah,
he came back and was an impact player in the dome for those guys. So it worked out well on the back end of the season.
yeah, having that close to the season, him being a part of that championship victory against Acadiana, I think, and the role that he played coming off, we talk about what Terrence Welsh did a couple of years ago after his injury coming back in the semis, and then obviously what he did out in Nakadich. Big player step up, and that's kind of what you want to see from a player like Blaine, who there's a lot of excitement and so much buzz about seeing what he does on the field, ending on such a high note, and then what a great offseason with OT7 and being part of uh, a team that you're very familiar with. I think that his performance at Flow, then what he did at LSU camp, his testing numbers at Ohio State. He's just been checking every box along the way. He had one of the best plays against Bryce Underwood in the 7-on-7 portion of LSU's Friday Night Lights. In coverage, you saw him manhandling some receivers, showing that toughness and that physicality you would want from someone who's 6'2" and 200 pounds. Um, Obviously, people talk about his ability to possibly grow into a linebacker at the next level, but the way he's maintained his body and just turned into this muscled up safety, I right now give him no reason to step away from the safety position. He's so dynamic there in all phases of the game. I can't wait to see him this season.
Yeah, as much as he's kind of brushed off the potential of ending up at linebacker, which I think he's ultimately open to, but he prefers playing safety. That 4.4 he ran at Ohio State, I think couldn't have ended up with a bigger smile on his face to just show how much ground he can cover in a hurry. And I think you mentioned his background and playing with Flo and whatnot, and he and Aiden know each other well through that experience, and just in general how small the recruiting world is now in the 2020s and whatnot. And there's a good relationship there, and I don't think that the fact that Aiden's on board necessarily veers Blaine away. I think they can play next to each other and be really complimentary guys. We also talked a week ago about Blaine's older brother, Jacob, who is now an LSU target for the 2025 class. How much do you think those two guys are talking about some of this? They've been guys that I think have an interest in playing together still at the next level, but had been open to the fact that they need to make their individual decisions. But now the fact that LSU for one of Blaine's top five is an option for the Houston commit and Jacob. How much do you think that conversation is happening in that Bradford household?
Well, I imagine it's been happening for quite some time. If I know the Bradfords, but listen,
About 15 years or so, whenever they could first talk.
yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it started with the training. But listen, here's the interesting thing. Blaine could have put Houston in his top five if it was that important to him. But I think that like I alluded to in the last episode, Houston has not given up on Jacob Bradford and is not going to let him out of their class very easily. You see the offers coming into Louisiana kids from Coach Fritz and that staff. They are continuing to recruit Louisiana, and they're not going to stop in 2025. And they're probably going to get Blaine on campus at some point because his family is so close, and they obviously aspire to continue to play together at the next level. I think the fact that LSU is shared in there is obviously the advantage that any kid from Baton Rouge is going to have in their recruitment. But I know that LSU has some work to do. Corey Raymond has to go to work, continuing to put energy into his relationship with Jacob, in the same way that Corey and Coach Olson have to continue to do that with Blaine, because they're getting recruited by some of the best DB coaches around the country, and Coach Linguist at Alabama, and the coaches up at Ohio State, and Coach Terry and Coach Gideon over at Texas, who have a knack for getting big time players out of Louisiana the past couple of years. So, if I'm LSU, I think they have to fixate on trying to change Jacob's mind first. If they're able to do that, I think that would naturally be a step forward with Blaine, who is probably going to dive a little bit closer to it in the summer with his official visits. If LSU wins out for Jacob Bradford and changing his mind, he might be getting ready to move in or already be on campus when Blaine is doing those OVs. That might be part of it.
Fans need to keep their eyes on both Bradford brothers as well as Phillip Wright. But honestly, the next commit to the Tigers class may very well be coming from out of state in a guy we've talked about, I think, a couple weeks ago, in Jimcoily, the fantastic safety from up there at Lipscomb Academy in Nashville. He's set to announce on Thursday. He's got a top 4 of LSU, Alabama, Tennessee, and Stanford. And it seems like the optimism is still there that he's going to be potentially Baton Rouge bound. What's been the latest you've heard on him, or the latest sense you've gotten on CJ and his recruitment, and if your optimism is still in place as well on the potential of him joining the LSU secondary for that 2025 class?
Yeah, I think I put my pick in for LSU with Jimcoily in June after his OV. He ended up not taking OVs to Tennessee or Alabama, and going into August 8th, his decision. It is a 2-team race between Stanford and LSU, and from some what I gathered, he wanted to wait. He waited almost 2 months since his official visit to go public with his decision. I was told he wanted to be 100% confident. LSU has really kind of hammered home though since that official visit. Daily communication with Jimcoily. They've identified him as one of much like another Tennessee big time safety they landed a couple of years ago in Jacoby Stevens, as a guy that can maybe start his career off in the secondary and eventually grow into one of those linebackers like we spoke about with Blaine Bradford. CJ going into his senior season at Nashville Lipscomb Academy, 6'3", 210 pounds, the athleticism and range to cover back deep, but also a very physical player that can play by the line of scrimmage, play in the front seven. So at that versatility, I think they can see that down the road once they get him in the weight program. I'll say this. He broke it down for me. The Stanford education, no one is going to beat that. And they have a really exciting young football staff over there in Palo Alto. But at LSU, I think he's intrigued by the opportunity for the platform, the stage that Death Valley is. And that staff has very much taken a vested interest in Jimcoily, from BK to Frank Wilson, who coached CJ's dad at O. Perry Walker back in the day, and Coach Olson, who sees that multiplicity in his game to add to that defense potentially.
Those guys doing a heck of a job, obviously. Both on the recruiting trail, and it's been fun watching them back into actual action early on in camp, including the guy you mentioned, Jacoby Stevens, who's on that staff. And he was probably one of my takeaways from camp today, was watching him coaching and the energy that he brings, and pulling guys to the side and kind of working through some detailed instruction in between reps as they finish up their one-on-one reps and stuff. And so it's kind of cool to watch Jacoby go from once upon a time the young guy we were watching first make his way to campus on to one of the veteran leaders of that team, and now these last few years back as a member of the staff and watching what he's doing.
His grandparents, his grandparents are from Crowley, so not too far from home. He's got some Cajun in the blood, and of course was such a huge prospect for Austin Thomas when he was a part of it. I think it was Les Miles or Coach O, but sometime I think they were still Les Miles when they got Jacoby's commitment, and Ed was able to hold on to it down the stretch, but. He was the prize 5-star safety and was fantastic at Oakland Murfreesboro. I remember seeing him and his career, such a veteran captain-like figure for that team, even maybe if he wasn't the NFL career that maybe you expected. So no surprise that he still loves the game. And, like seeing Nick I always love seeing Nick on the staff. You love seeing the players that had great college careers and now are a part of the program.
Yep, and they've certainly done a good job of finding those guys that are ready to step into the coaching world and bring them on. They've done a great job, like in Jacoby's situation and CJ's situation, of finding guys out of state who, and this is not just this staff, but obviously the last few LSU staffs, finding out of state guys who are Louisiana family ties. the readiness with which LSU coaches identify those dynamics and really kind of harp on the opportunity to play at a home state institution, if not for the kid, for the family, is always pretty impressive.
No doubt.
He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. Again, it should be a fun week for LSU fans on the recruiting trail. They've already got Aiden Hall committed to that 2026 class. Keep an eye on CJ Jimcoily up there in Nashville on Thursday. And as Sam mentioned before, keep the Twitter notifications on for Philly Wright for something to pop here sooner than later. Again, he's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. This is Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. Thanks for watching, and be well until next time.